This is UMass Sports Weekly.
Hello and welcome to September 16th's episode of UMass Sports Weekly, your source for UMass sports. I'm your host, Chris Corso, and we are excited to bring you this week's news in UMass athletics. Could the UMass football team pull off a last-second upset to Vanderbilt in Nashville? How did the Minutemen field hockey team fare against California? We'll cover the women's soccer team's matchup at UConn, and for those of you who don't consider cheerleading to be a sport, this week, you've got another thing coming. Stay tuned for our thorough analysis and highlights. This is UMass Sports Weekly. Hello and welcome back to UMass Sports Weekly. I'm here with Joey Saade and Zander Manning, and we're going to be talking a little UMass football. The UMass football team started out 0-3, guys, after this tough loss to Vanderbilt this weekend. I'm just going to sum it all up with what Mark Whipple said after the game. He said there's no question they don't know how to win. They want to win, but they don't know how to prepare. So, Zander, I'm going to start with you. What are your takeaways from this heartbreaking loss against Vanderbilt, 34-31?
First thing I want to take away from this game is the special teams. Big news over the weekend, special teams coach Ted Dasher was fired by the team and the athletic program. And also, just that the thing that on everyone's mind is that last second kick by Blake Lucas, 22-yard kick that he could have easily made, but he shanked it to the left. Although I wouldn't sweat it too much, although he does have a history of missing kicks like that, but it's not really that big of a deal.
So Zander's talking about the kick at the end of the game. Blake Lucas had a chance to tie it 34-34 from 22 yards out, and of course he missed it, and he got a hug from the defensive end from Vanderbilt to end the game, which was a brutal loss for the Minutemen. Joey, let's talk a little bit about the play of the quarterback, Blake Frohnapfel. He's from Marshall, the transfer, and he picked up the starting spot. He's been playing pretty well, some production, a lot of points on the board for UMass, not like last season. What do you think about his play so far this year?
Yeah, Chris, you just kind of said what I was going to start off with. They've averaged 25 points per game so far through 3 games. And, last year, through the first 3 games, they only had 36 total points. So I think, although the 0-3 start doesn't show for it, the guys picked up the offense pretty well, averaging 25 points a game. Against Vanderbilt, he was 17 for 34, 50% passing percentage, which is kind of what he's been at the whole year. And he's managed the game pretty well. They're 0-3. If you look at an 0-3, but if they close out those last 2 games, they could easily be 2-1. We could be having a completely different discussion about Blake Frohnapfel. I know he probably has the most experience, on the roster of the quarterback. And I still think you have to consider him as your starting quarterback because, he hasn't done anything to lose that job. They could be 2-1. Although they faltered at the end, maybe, if he could have dictated the pace on offense a little bit, they would have had the ball for longer and not allowed those comebacks to happen. But, like Zander mentioned before, special teams kind of killed them. And I look at Blake, I don't think he's done anything wrong. So far he has 5 touchdowns and 2 interceptions on the season, which, they're not eye-popping, but they're not something to say, this guy's not your starting quarterback.
I agree with that, Joey. Blake has really shown that he could move on the ground. He's shown that he could throw the ball deep. They were winning the game 14-0 at the beginning of this game, and they were also winning last week when they blew that lead over at Gillette. So
also, not just that, but also they've played 2 teams in 2 tough divisions,
Yep.
Pac-12 and the SEC, always with good teams in those divisions, with USC, Oregon, now number 1 in the country in that division. So they're tough divisions, and they've also been playing some good games against some tough divisions.
They've been very competitive, and that's all we could ask for out of a team that only won 1 game last season. They haven't been great at all.
2 in the last 2 years, too.
Exactly. They have not shown any promise, and this year at least we're getting promise, which is good to see. Now we're going to shift things over to the running back in Lorenzo Woodley. He's kind of picked up the starting role for the Minutemen. Zander, what do you think about his performance so far?
I thought he really stepped up in the first quarter. I saw Jamal Wilson go down, and I was a little nervous because he's been consistently performing. And I was starting to think, yeah, this guy could be our starting running back. But then again, at the same time, he wasn't having the best games. And then Woodley comes in and steps in and gets 2 rushing touchdowns in his first game as sort of the starter, not officially, but as the starter. And I thought he really did a good job in stepping up when he needed to.
Well, that's good to hear that we got a guy stepping up at running back and a guy stepping up at quarterback, two positions that we did not have any production out of last year.
No, sir.
So now, next week, coming up, we have another big matchup against a team who's back on the map, and that team is Penn State. So, Joey, what do you think our chances are out in Joe Paterno land out in Penn State?
Well, like me and Zander kind of talked about before the show, you're talking about a team that plays in the Big Ten, a team that's always had a good reputation. Christian Hackenberg, their quarterback, he's considered one of the best in the country right now, and they're coming off a pretty big high. They beat Rutgers 13-10 last week on a game-winning drive, which was led by Hackenberg. So obviously, their offense is going to be there. You look at Penn State is Penn State. They're playing at Penn State as well. That's a tough place to play. Maybe one of the tougher environments
Tough place
to play
to win too, not
in the
just
country.
to play.
They got over 100,000 fans every single game. When I look at what UMass has to do, whenever you go on the road, you have to try to keep the game close in the beginning. They can't let this slip out of their hands right from the get-go. If they go down 14-21-0 early in the first half, mentally and physically, they're probably out of it just because Penn State is that good. But you look at UMass as well. They're coming off two heartbreaking losses. Can they use that as motivation into a game against Penn State? Obviously, they're underdogs. They're not going to be favored. But I don't see UMass coming out with a win. But you never know.
And what's great is Mark Whipple, as you heard in this quote, he expects them to win. He expects them to be in every game. They have been in every game, but they haven't closed out. And I think that he expects they can win every one of these games. He's been in the NFL. He's won a national championship here. So he knows what it takes to win. And what do you think the chances are this week against Penn State, Zander?
I think, again, it's going to be a close game because they played a good game against a Pac-12 team and an SEC team. Both tough divisions. Big Ten, again, another tough one. But both teams also, another debate that we haven't brought up is that both have new coaches, too. At the same time, Bill O'Brien, Penn State, they lost him to the Texans, so that's a big loss for them. They're transitioning their program as well. And it could bring in some dynamics there, again, with new coaches for another week. 2 weeks in a row, but at the same time, I'm not expecting a huge win, but I'm expecting if they do win by about 2-3 or losing by about 7-10.
All right, so we're expecting a competitive game out in Penn State. This is Joey Saade, this is Zander Manning, and we'll be back to cover a little bit of UMass field hockey.